It's Thursday, July 1st. This is episode 167 of the Token CEO podcast. We are presented by Sports Research. It is about 9 billion degrees in New York City right now. I don't have air conditioning, which is a true joy. It means you have to sleep in your underwear and less clothing than you would usually wear. I always like to sleep in a navy blue wool sweater. But anyways, now that I'm having to strip down all the time, and everyone is because it's 4th of July and everybody wants to go to the beach, there is no company that better helps you prepare to look your best at the beach than Sports Research. If you go to Sports Research, you can get collagen, you can get vitamins, you can get their at-home workout kit, get yourself all sorts of abs, you can get a waist trimmer, or you can get their very best secret, which is Sweet Sweat. Go to sportsresearch.com and use code TOKEN for 30% off at checkout. You can get anything and everything you need to be beach body ready. Today's episode, here's what we're doing. We're going through 4 things. 1, I'm going to give just a quick top line. I went to DC this week. I'll tell you guys about that. 2nd, we'll dive into the headlines. We have a great interview with Lisa Bilyeu, and then we are bringing back the adulting segment. So yesterday, I spent the day in DC. I got this random email from a staffer, like a cold email, was like, hey, would you ever want to come down to DC? And I was like, yes, I would. Daniela met me at LaGuardia Airport in a tie-dyed sweatshirt and a garden outfit, I would say. Daniela was dressed for a DC garden party. It was adorable. I looked pretty much like a 6th grader where my knees were skinned, forgot to bring heels, so I only had my sneakers, and then I had this dress that as you get more swollen as the day goes on, the dress looked great at 7:30. By the time 11:45 rolled down, it was a hot mess. But that didn't matter because we were off to see the government. We talked about a couple things. One, there's a large desire in Washington right now to understand what is happening with big tech. And I think they're collecting all different points of view from people who work with big tech or companies like Barstool Sports who are dependent on big tech for growth. And then the second piece is they're also trying to understand how to harness and manage social media to talk to their constituents. And that's a big challenge in Washington. They don't have access to the internet streets, I would say, the way that we do here. Or they don't live in the swamp the way we do here at Barstool Sports or in other media companies or internet first companies. When you think about people in politics and you think about Washington in general, they're in marketing. They're trying to market their congressperson. They're trying to market for the legislation that they want passed. They're trying to win their seats. One of the interesting discussions we had with a large group of people, they were awesome. Only women ask questions. And then I was like, hey, are any of the men here going to ask any questions? At which point then only the men ask questions. But it was a great group of people, super sharp, very smart, and have some interesting set of challenges, which is they're working with congressmen and women. They've got busy day jobs. They're not social media people. These guys are responsible for growing their brands, for getting their points of view across, for rallying their constituencies. What I loved about what this group was doing is they're bringing in outside people to talk to them about how the real world works. And they're taking that information and they're leveraging it and incorporating it into their daily jobs. So I thought that was very interesting. I thought it was smart. My dad would always say the same thing about education, which is when you're in a bubble, sometimes the best thing you can do is to bring in people outside of the bubble. The date, January 6th, all anyone talks about is January 6th, January 6th, January 6th. Everyone you meet tells their personal story of where they were for the insurrection. So everyone has their personal story. And then what was so interesting is we're standing outside waiting for an Uber after the day. And I was like, all right, so do you guys these guys were Republicans. I'm like, do you hang out with your Democratic counterparts? Do you guys go to beers or for anybody who watched A Few Good Men, they had that softball league where everybody's mixing it up. And what was interesting is they said post-Trump and post-January 6th that the walls are just so divided and everyone is so angry. They were like, we would hang out with the Democratic versions of us. They didn't think that would be reciprocated. And I left thinking about that a lot because, I think on a day in, day out basis, I don't think people think a whole lot about what happens in Washington beyond to be cynical about it or distrustful about it. I think people think about the government really the same way they think about media, which is generally with a bad taste in your mouth. And then I'm thinking that there's like all these really young, talented people who come from all different places. They seemed so eager to learn and to make something happen that I'm like, God, you guys could like bridge that. And imagine like bridging that divide at the bar. Like I just don't think there's an easier place to do it. So that was my advice, and that they needed to get into the newsletter business. I'm like, I don't know why you people aren't using newsletters to communicate what you want to say to your constituents. Like, why wouldn't you have a morning brew for whatever your policy is or whatever your platform might be? Okay, so speaking of antitrust, I like roll into Washington and I'm like, what are you guys working on? And they're like, antitrust. So I was like, oh boy. So the big news this week is that the FTC complaint against big tech was dismissed. It was dismissed for being legally insufficient. I think there's two major issues with the FTC case. One is that they're trying to establish that Facebook has a monopoly over personal social networking. Big question in government about what exactly is personal social messaging. And then the second is that according to the judge, they failed to prove that Facebook has 60+% share of the market. So I don't think this is the end by virtue of what I saw yesterday in Washington. I don't think this is anywhere near the end of antitrust sentiment in Washington and antitrust legislation. What I think is very interesting, though, is how difficult it is to prove the case. And that's exactly what we see every day, right? When you are dependent on somebody else's algorithm, they can change the algorithm at any time. There's no contract for transparency. There's no real, it's so sophisticated in many cases. There's no true understanding or transparency into how the system works. I think if Washington I don't even understand how the system works. I can't, let alone somebody in DC understanding how the system works, or a judge understanding how the system works. Antitrust, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be one of the biggest topics out there. It was all anyone was talking about. Truly, everyone was talking about it in DC. I think that's here to stay. I think the second piece that's complex is we deal with this all the time in our business, in certain sectors of our business, which is that the law hasn't comprehended the world that we live in, right? So I live this all the time in the alcohol laws or in the gaming laws, which in some cases are hundreds of years old. Antitrust doesn't, is Facebook or Google a utility? I don't know. But the way data moves, the way privacy is managed, the power, the economics, the control that can be garnered through technology, the legal system, frankly, just isn't adequate, and our legislation system isn't up to date. So it's very obvious that there's going to be so much work that has to be done to establish what are the ground rules, and then how are these platforms playing within those ground rules. So I think that's going to be very interesting. Second up, and this was interesting, this came up yesterday, is Amazon's growing fitness ambition. So Amazon is hiring a head of fitness programming to join a team at Amazon called Halo. I think Halo's a great brand. This group is leading everything and anything related to their new wave of fitness services. One of the stories that came out yesterday, and is something that the DC folks are very focused on, is what's happening in tech right now is the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Apples, the Googles of the world get an eye to all of the new companies coming up in the space. Amazon's meeting with, anyone and everyone in the fitness and technology space, right? They're going to meet with Whoop. They're going to meet with Mirror. They're going to meet with all of the startups who are creating interesting companies, in this case, around fitness. You could argue the same thing for commerce. You could argue the same thing for sports. You could argue the same thing for finance or fashion. And what's happening is that because these companies are so big and they're so powerful, they're like, ooh, let me understand and figure out what you do. I'm either going to buy you and, eat your competitor, or take what their competitor, a small nascent competitor, mind you, but take what their competitor is doing and use that to fuel their own service, right? This is what Amazon's doing with MGM. Amazon is like, we can't make blockbuster movies. We're going to buy MGM and have them make blockbuster movies for us. They have so much money. The platform is so big. They have so much data. They have so much power that they really have their pick of the litter. They can pick whatever company they want in whatever sector they need. subsume it and use that to fuel their future business. So that's one path. The other path is they're just like, fuck it, we'll just build it ourselves, which is clearly what's happening now. So here's why this is interesting. One, the health and wellness space is obviously a huge space. You've got Apple playing with the Apple Watch. You've got a bunch of interesting startups like Whoop and Aura and others, who we work with. You've got Google buying Fitbit. So Apple's in the game. Google's bought Fitbit. I don't really love a Fitbit. I've tried to love Fitbit. Peloton is in the game. They're still independent. I think it's going to be interesting to see who buys Peloton. Aura and Whoop, as I'd mentioned, they both each had $100 million investment rounds. And now Amazon is like, all right, we're in it to win it with Halo. We're going to double down on building our own service. Obviously, it's a race to own customers. It's a race to have both hardware and software. It's a race to have people's data. It's a race to build new subscription services that get you closer to the end consumer by companies who are selling that end consumer a whole host of products. Speaking of Amazon, Amazon is also in the podcast game. So we've been talking a lot about Spotify. Rich Greenfeld had a big piece on Spotify this week. I didn't actually read it, but I saw his headline, which was good. Speaking of people needing to get in the newsletter game. Amazon acquired Art19. So Art19 is a platform. We used to be on Art19 back in like 2016, and then we were like, no thanks, we'll build it ourselves. Not that we're like Amazon, but we try. Art19 is a podcast and monetization platform. Amazon now is going to be able to host and to monetize podcasts. So you look at what Spotify's doing. They've acquired a whole bunch of companies. They're vertically integrating the ability to host, the ability to distribute, the ability to clip and promote, and then the creation of content itself. It's very obvious Amazon is going to follow suit. Facebook announced about a week and a half ago they're getting in the game. Apple's the only one who's actually very quiet here, and they've obviously had the lion's share of the podcast market. So it'll be interesting to see what. Also really exciting or maybe alarming to see, this is the power of a big platform company, right? You can endeavor to win in podcasting in the same way you can endeavor to win in movies, in the same way you can endeavor to win in health and fitness and grocery and consumer goods. So we'll continue to watch what happens with Amazon. Instagram has announced that they are doing a rev share with publishers who are making content on IGTV. I just texted Gaz. I'm like, are we taking advantage of this? It sounds like Now This, Pop Sugar, and Group 9 Media are. I would say that if those guys get to do it, I should be able to do it too. Facebook and Instagram are trying to satiate their creators who have many other choices of places to put their content. And they are feeling the lack of ability to make money on Facebook and on Instagram in particular is problematic and is suppressing their desire to make content here. Second big piece of news is that BuzzFeed is acquiring Complex and going public via SPAC. As you guys probably know, everybody's going public right now via SPAC. SPAC means Special Purpose Acquisition Company. In 2020, if you had a company that needed funding, you short-circuited the IPO process, which is a large pain in the ass. It's very arduous. It's very complex. There's a lot of risk involved. SPACs became the de jour way to go public, which is essentially it was a shortcut to get access to public funding. There's been a lot of companies in the digital media space that have SPAC'd. I think Taboola is SPACing. Outbrain is part of a SPAC. What's happening now in the SPAC world is that God and everyone created SPACs. So every smart investor group, every banking group created a SPAC. The Chernin Group guys have a SPAC. I'm on the board of directors of that. And now those SPACs are looking for companies to fill up the SPAC and be the vehicle for going public. So it's not surprising that BuzzFeed is going to go public via SPAC. If Barstool hadn't been acquired by Penn, we would 100% be going public via SPAC right now. But I think what is interesting to see is there was a big Axios report on this. The biggest companies worldwide in media, you've got Red Ventures, which is a VC conglomerate. You've got Dotdash. I have no idea what Dotdash is. You've got Penske Media. You've got Vox Media. You've got J2, BuzzFeed, Bustle, and Group 9. Have to be honest, I don't think consumers give a shit about any of these holding companies, and I would be surprised if they have brands within them that are rich and viable. But that doesn't matter for shit on Wall Street. So the SPAC train rolls on and BuzzFeed and Complex become part of it. Let's talk Robinhood. They initially filed for their IPO in March. They were supposed to IPO in June. Now it's getting pushed. We'll see if it happens next week. What's interesting about Robinhood is the regulators are all up in arms or confused or getting their heads around crypto. So obviously on Robinhood, similar to other products like Voyager or others, you can trade brokerage stocks in addition to being able to trade crypto. That's hard for people to get their heads around. The other thing is just the gamification of trading. I have a Robinhood account. I have to tell you, I fucking love it. Swipe up to buy something. It's like the best. I don't know why. Actually, I don't know why you just don't swipe up to buy everything in life right now. Like swipe up to buy, it's just amazing. I love swipe up to buy. Swipe up to buy is a great concept. Now, it makes people nervous because if you're a teenager, it doesn't require a whole lot of effort and thought to think about swiping up. You're used to swiping up to see a story or swiping up to subscribe to something. Now you're swiping up without any consideration and you're spending money and you may not be sure where that money goes, what it's doing, what your expected return may be. If you think about old school brokerage where you had to go through like 2 years of disclaimers to be able to do anything, and new world brokerage where you can just swipe up and there, bing, you've brought, confetti pops and you've bought stocks. That's the world we're moving to. And I think what's interesting is how are the regulators going to keep up and exactly what can you keep up with? Like that's just good technology. That's just good user experience. But there's a danger to that. And I think instead of trying to chase new technology with old rules, government and regulators need to find new ways to keep consumers safe. But those ways have to be born out of what's happening today, not what was written yesterday. So let's take a quick break for Blockfolio. I'm actually working on an interesting opportunity with Blockfolio right now that I'm excited about. Blockfolio is the world's most popular mobile app for cryptocurrency tracking and trading. You can follow the prices of more than 10,000 coins, including AS. Let's go. There's a female founder of the AS coin. Who does not love that? You can buy and sell Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, and other top tokens with zero fees. I repeat, zero fees. You also get a free coin with every trade over $10. You can visit the App Store. You can download Blockfolio today. Blockfolio is a great partner of Barstool Sports. I think we'll only be doing more with Blockfolio. And who does not want to buy Ask? Next up is Lisa Bilyeu. I loved Lisa Bilyeu, so I hope you enjoy this interview. She is a spitfire. She has so much energy. She's a British woman. She was raised in a traditionally Greek family. She's broken out of the mold. She and her husband created an insanely successful business around Quest nutrition bars. What Lisa has done several times in her life is to break out of the molds people had for her to push to be something new. So I took away a lot from this. She's a motivational speaker. She has her own podcast. I think the best thing of all is she's really comfortable. She's very approachable. She's extremely forceful. Like she doesn't shut up, but she tells you exactly. It's kind of like listening to a girlfriend about the things you already know about yourself, but you're just too afraid to do. So I loved Lisa. I love this interview. I hope you do too. So let's just jump right in, Lisa. So what are your superhero powers? What are your superpowers?
I really do think about this and I'm like, okay, what is the thing? And the way I think of a superpower is what is the thing that you can go to when you are feeling at your weakest and you need an extra boost? And to me, it is the reminder that even when I fall, I can get back up. So no matter how weak I am, no matter how much I fail, no matter how, negative the voice is in my head, I still remind myself, even though all of this exists, I'm the person that can get back up. And that's so motivating.
I love that. And have you always had that superpower or did you do something, your story is really interesting, which we'll get into, but have you done things or do you have advice to other people about what they can do to kind of harness that power?
Yeah, I definitely did not start there. And what's crazy is I get asked a lot now about confidence. And I swear to God, Erika, go back to the 13-year-old Lisa and just like transcribe the thoughts that were in her head and you will be shocked. I didn't feel good about myself. I was teased. I was bullied. I was made fun of with my big nose. I had this big head brace that wrapped around my head.
Remember the head brace?
Oh my God.
Terrible. Orthodontics has really come a long way.
It really has, right? But back then,
it really has.
Do you remember the elastic bands that they would put in your mouth?
Yes, the ones that connected the top to the bottom.
Yes.
I had braces and my gums had an allergic reaction to the metal and they were so swollen. It was like I only had gums. So ugly.
Oh
I
my
think
God. Well,
every
so
13-year-old girl feels ugly, but a 13-year-old girl with bad headgear or orthodontics is truly ugly.
yeah, and I had the unibrow just to make things worse. I'm Greek Orthodox, so I had the big frizzy hair and the
Mhm.
unibrow, and then the really long name that people would tease me. It was Charalambos, and people would say Shag a lamppost. And when you're 13 and live in England, when someone calls you Shag a lamppost, it gets very upsetting.
Yes, I get that. My dad was the principal, and his name, my last name was Ayers, and my dad's first name was Dick. So Dick Ayers was his name, which I feel
Oh
like
my
was like
God.
he was made to be a principal with that name. But it's like I spirit animalness. I had a similar childhood. It feels like.
I freaking love that. So I should be asking you then how on earth you were able to come to where you are today.
I don't know. It's so funny that you're asking. Like, I was thinking about like the 13-year-old version of me. And it's funny. You're right. It's almost like when you're a 13-year-old, you're the opposite of who you probably are now, which is it's like every doubt, every fear, every bit of like misdirected energy and the desire to fit in. I don't know. I think it's also interesting how you talk about your superpower is like what you have when you're at the weakest. I think
Mm.
mine is just energy and and the desire to do something. Like I'll always be doing something. I think it's not dissimilar to what you're saying. It was funny. I talked to Rebecca Minkoff, and she had the same superpower, which is that she could have something really bad happen and she's like, I'm just going to fucking figure it out. Like I'm going to do the next thing. And maybe that's like the female superpower really is like you just get up and do the next thing.
To be honest, 100%. And the reason for me that I did it was actually out of insecurity. It was, I I am not good naturally at things when I first try them, except art actually. But everything else, I just struggled. And so I
Mm-hmm.
started to feel badly about myself. I was told, I was bullied, I was picked on, right? And then I did things that I wasn't very good at. I was put in a special class for the way that I held my pen. And so all these things growing up, they really do become a part of your identity.
Yeah.
Um, and so as I was getting older and older, I still had that mindset. I still had that mindset that I was no good, that I didn't have worth, I didn't have value. And so, to be honest, it was really, how do I overcome this? I tried to shut it off. Like, I really did. Everyone's like, oh, don't listen to it. Okay, great, I'll shut it off. I wasn't able to. So now you can imagine, Eric, I just feel badly about myself for not being able to shut out the negative voice.
Yeah. It's just another thing you weren't good at.
Exactly. So I was like, okay, this doesn't serve me. And so now how do I, and that's a phrase I now repeat. Does it serve me? Does it serve my goal? Does it serve my mission? If yes, keep going. If no, then pivot and change. So as I started to realize this mindset wasn't serving me, but I can't switch it off, how do I reframe it? And so the reframe was actually, don't feel badly about falling down, but you can pat yourself on the back, Lisa, to getting back up.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
now actually also I'm not relying on anyone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a, oh, well, they didn't do it, so that's why. It's like, no, either I got back up or I didn't. That's in
Yeah.
my control, no one else's.
I love that. I think that's exactly right. It's also it's so funny. I also got in trouble. I held, how you're supposed to put the pencil like at the like little knob. I could never hold it. Or like I remember in elementary school, I couldn't sit cross-legged and you had to sit cross-legged in the circle and my mother would get called and it was like I mean, who cares if you can sit cross-legged or not? But I also think one thing for girls and also just for all types of people is that you don't have to getting back up again or trying something or doing something is something there's no yardstick for that. It's binary. And that's what I also think is hard for girls and for kids is that you're measured by somebody else's yardstick constantly. Are you as good at math, sports, work, relationships, how you look, and the idea that you can fall down and try something and get back up, it is so there's nothing subjective about it. And so kind of that absence of judgment, I think also is very empowering So maybe that's why this could be everybody's superpower.
I love that. And I like what you said. It's not subjective. It's binary, right? You either do or you don't.
Right. What do you find if you think about, you talk to a lot of women, you have a really interesting story. What I love most about your story, as I understand it, is you were raised and groomed to be one thing. You were supposed to, like, the way I would describe you is a woman who was supposed to be one thing and ended up being something very, very different. So how do you think about your own journey and describe that a little bit? And then how do you help other people defy that?
Yes, it's such a great question because the more and more I think about it, we all are, let's say, 50% genetics and 50% hardwired and 50% malleable. So it's what school did you go to? What parents did you have? What friends did you have? What zip code did you grow up in? All these things almost aren't in our control. And so by the time we get to 13, 14, our teenage years, we've already have a foundation that maybe we haven't chosen to have built. And so that, in hindsight, going back, I realized that I was brought up in a very traditional Greek Orthodox family. So over time, I was absolutely being trained and molded into being a good Greek housewife and parent. And it wasn't I didn't have dreams. I wanted to be a movie maker. I was living in London. I had all these big audacious dreams. But what happens is, slowly over time, dreams start to if you're not fanning them, dreams start to dissipate and reality starts to really take a hold of you. And the reality that I had been trained, it's kind of, one of my favorite analogies and movies actually is Karate Kid, the wax on, the wax off, the practice, right? He didn't know that he was actually, while he was waxing the car, that he was actually practicing for something that happened in the future. It's almost sadly like I was waxing on and off without realizing it, so that when I got married, I actually ended up slipping into being a housewife, even though I didn't mean to. So I had all these big dreams, but I've been practicing and being trained to be a certain thing, and I didn't question it. And this is really the big key: is what happens to people when they don't hit rock bottom. I've interviewed so many amazing, incredibly successful women that have done just unimaginable things. And every time I interview them, it usually stems from, I hit rock bottom and there was no other way. And so because they hit rock bottom, they made a change and they, fought their way up. But when I look at my own life, I think about the fact that I was in 8 years of mundane purgatory. My life was mundane enough. It was wake up, take care of your husband, feed the puppies, go to the gym, wash the clothes, cook the food. Husband gets home, put dinner out on the thing. And it wasn't bad in the sense of I didn't have to worry about a roof over my head. I didn't have to worry about feeding myself.
Yeah, you were comfortable.
Exactly. Now, what ends up happening is, I think over time, as women very specifically, we're taught to not complain. It's like, well, who am I to complain when so and so has it worse? Who am I to complain when someone is talking about committing suicide? Oh, that isn't me. So, all right, let's just keep going. And so I never asked anything more of myself. And so for 8 years, I stayed in a place that I like to call, purgatory of the mundane, because I just got stuck there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until my husband came home one day and was like, hey, do you mind helping with this protein bar company? That was like, yeah, sure, no problem. That I was thrust into the growth of Quest and then what led into my evolution.
That's incredible. I really like how you describe that, because I think that is what happens to so many people, which is it's almost it's when comfort is too comfortable. And even though it's not great, it might not be exciting, it might not be fulfilling, it's comfortable and it's easy. And my experience and observation is most people are very reticent to leave things that are comfortable and easy, right? Like we're pretty much wired to avoid pain. And being comfortable isn't painful, right? And so as a result, really very little changes. And I think, what happens is you wake up 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, 40 years later, and you're like, what's my legacy? What have I created? What do I stand for? I think the other hard thing is when you're for women in particular, our age, when you are living vicariously through your children, because that is where there is hope and future. And I think one of the hardest, saddest things is like, you can be anything you want at any time you want. You just have to be willing, to your point, to be uncomfortable. And if you can get uncomfortable, you can change, but you can't change without discomfort. And I think that's a lot of times where people are like, ooh, that's just too much.
Yeah, so true. And I actually just interviewed a psychotherapist recently, and she says pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And I was like, oh my God, that's so true. We so try not to feel the pain, as to your point, is that we end up slowly, quietly suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, well, hang on a minute. You can't avoid the pain. So just let the pain come, but you don't have to choose to suffer in it. You can use that pain to get to the life that you actually want. So yeah, sitting in the discomfort is 100%, but it just doesn't feel good, which is why you end up finding a lot of people in marriages where they haven't been happy for 10, 20 years, but they don't make a change. And what ends up happening is COVID hits, reality hits, and now you actually have to ask yourself the questions. And that was really what ended up happening to me, is asking myself the real questions that I had been afraid to ask myself for 8 years. Am I happy? Do I want to take care of my husband? Because all of those things, I was so worried about the outcome of my answer that I didn't ask myself the question. Now, the sad news is just ask yourself the question, get through the pain, and now you can actually come out the other side and use it for good, but I didn't. And so it wasn't until I asked myself, do I want to still cook for my husband? Do I still want to be there for him? And I had to remind myself that has no equation to how much I love him. It's just not the life I want.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to start being okay with that and asking myself the tough questions. And then to your point of, it doesn't matter how old you are, like you can achieve what you want. And what I like to say is how to get there is asking yourself the question, no BS, what would it take? So I say, for instance, if you want to be the best pianist in the world, Erika, right? And I say to you, like, Lisa, I really want to be the best pianist. This really means a lot to me. Like, I'm going to be on stage playing in front of the Queen. All right. I would say, okay, let's play the no BS game. All right. So how old are you? How many years, are in your prime years? Can you read music? How many kids do you have? So we'll find out all of those details. And it's like, okay, so you'll probably have to never speak to your partner again. You're probably only going to see your kid once every year. You're going to have to give up your job. You may have to eat fast food because you don't have time to cook. All right. There's your plan, Erika. Now, here's how you become the best pianist in the world. Do you still want it? And you can turn around and go, nope. And now when someone says, oh, can you play the piano? You won't say, I can't. You'll say, no, I chose not to.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's exactly how to frame it. That's exactly how to frame it. What advice do you have for people? What advice do you have for people who are like, shit, I want to be the pianist, right?
Yeah.
I'm willing to eat fast food, not see anyone. Your fingers are bleeding because what is the advice? What is the advice that you have for people? Like, I think I like hear you in my heart. Like, I love what you're saying. It means a lot. I think what's also very hard is once you decide to set about making a change, whether it's a career change, a change in a relationship, a change in a skill set, professional change, one of the things that I also find, just sorry, as a non sequitur, Lisa, is I talk to a lot of women. I have a lot of women friends who are stay-at-home moms or who don't work outside the house. And it's hard if you have opted out of the workforce and then you think about getting back into it, right? For exactly the questions you asked about being a pianist. And most of the reasons that I find that women give is that they don't want to create discomfort for others. So it wouldn't be good for my kids. It wouldn't be good for my husband or my wife or my partner or whatever, if I were to work 4 days a week or if I took that job. And that's also something that I think is really tough, that I would love to see change in women, is just the subjugation of your needs and what will make you happy. Like, you know what? Yeah, your husband's going to figure it out. Your kids will live, but how do you think about that? And then what is the advice you give to people who decide they want to go for it?
Yeah, I love this question. So thrust into Quest. I started out, I'm just going to be a great supportive wife. I'm helping my husband. I'm shipping bars off my living room floor. What's a couple of bars, taking it to the post office. We didn't expect the company to grow at 57,000%. And so I went from shipping bars from my living room floor one day to within 2 years, I had 40 employees underneath me. I had no idea how to be a boss. I had 10,000 square feet of space. And here I am really working really hard. So over that process, I started to realize every day I was learning more. I was facing my inadequacies. I was growing. I was feeling good about myself. I felt like I was building purpose within myself versus just my purpose being about my husband. And that made me feel great. Now, of course, that part of me started to feel guilty. Does this mean I'm not a good wife? Does this mean that I'm not holding up to my end of the bargain, my end of the deal? But I was loving what I was doing. And so I said, okay, I just need to communicate this to my partner. I need to talk to him about the emotion and struggle that I'm going through of the fact that I actually don't want to stay at home anymore. I have to address that with him. But I think of relationships as it's like a tennis game. You have to decide, are you guys playing doubles and you're on the same side and your goal is to win the game together, or you're on opposite sides of the net? Like, it's as simple as that. And we just decide we're on the same side. And so we're trying to win the game together. So I know that he's my partner in this. It's not that I'm going against him, but I also know I'm the one changing the rules, if you will. I married him. I told him I was going to have 4 kids. And here I am. I don't want children anymore. And I want to work. So I realize I'm changing the game. So instead of walking in there just saying, this is what my life is going to be like now, I'm setting boundaries, I'm putting a stake in the ground and you have to respect them. That's not going to work. That's now me treating him like he's not my partner. So what I did is I said, okay, how would I want him to handle it? So I sat him down and I just started to talk about the pleasures and joys I was getting now in my life. And I was like, babe, this new work, this new job, owning, developing my own skill sets and failing and figuring things out. Like, I'm loving it. And I really do explain the emotion behind it. And then I said to him, I hope you know it's got nothing to do with you. I love you so much, but I no longer want to cook for you. I no longer want to clean for you. And in fact, I want you to take care of yourself. And so he just paused and he looked at me and he's like, what kind of husband would I be if I asked my wife to not pursue something that makes her as happy as I see you now? And then I gave him space and I said, okay, thank you. But I assume you have some, upset about it. Like, no, let's face it, if you get your food cooked.
Unless you're like a really bad, Lisa, are you a good cook or not?
I'm terrible, but it was edible.
That is the secret to this.
Yeah. So I just gave him some respect and I said, hey, let me know how you feel. Like, this is a safe place. And he said, all right. He's like, look, it's a shame. I love having my food cooked. So he's like, so do you mind just maybe weaning me off? And so I was like, no, not a problem. So we literally created a plan where I was like, all right, babe, how do you feel about this week? I'm just going to do 5 days. And then next week I'm going to do 4 days. And then the week after is going to be 3, right? And then by the end of the month, you're fully functioning on your own. And it just shows that I respect that he's going to need to process this, right? Because I think we all need to process any change in our lives. So even women at home right now that are thinking about what do they want to change in their lives, I would say express to your partner, to your children, what it means to you. And then also a big part for me was identifying what it means to be a good wife to me, not to the world, not to society. And I know I obviously don't have children, but I know a lot of mothers struggle with this, where they're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm not going to be a good mom if I do X, Y, and Z. And it's, well, don't listen to other people. Write on a piece of paper what being a good mother looks like to you. Actually write it down. And actually, it was Rachel Hollis I interviewed, and this is what she was explaining to me. She's like, because so many people are going to come at you. It's just, and it doesn't have to even be the public. So many people within your space, your friends, your family, everyone thinks they know better than you. And so it just comes down to, how do you make sure that they don't penetrate you in order to that stops you from acting? So now, what's a good mother? What's a good wife? What's a good person, human being? And now just live in accordance to those things. And to me, I started to realize that being a good wife didn't mean that I had to have children.
Yeah, I think that you're completely onto something where look, here's what you're describing. You made your partner an advocate for your happiness.
Yes.
By explaining why it emotionally works for you, you made him an advocate. You could say the same thing about a conversation with your boss. You could say the same thing about a conversation with your friend, with your mother. Like you made them an advocate for what you wanted, and you created an empathy between you of, this is really how I want to feel. You made it personal. I really love that you gave also room for, hey, sit on this and let me know if you agree, or not agree. Actually, you didn't say that. Let me know how this makes you feel, and what you would need, as a result of me wanting to make this thing happen. And I think, it's so interesting. I find that we tend to, and it's not just women, it's like everyone just goes into a conversation of me, this is what I want, me. And that doesn't create any empathy. It also doesn't create any advocacy. And to your tennis match analogy, it automatically puts you on the other side of the net. And so I would argue that if you're a young woman trying to decide, who you want your friends to be, or how you want your friends to be better friends, or for you to be a better friend, or to pursue something you want, or to ask for a raise, or to negotiate the terms of your relationship, this is a skill you could use for all of those things.
100%. And going back to the thing that I said earlier is, does it serve you? Whatever you're doing, just ask yourself that. And then if it doesn't, then move on and pivot. And then there was actually one other thing that you said that I'd love to add. I can't remember the exact words that you said, but when women especially, I think when we're trying new things, we're worried, oh my God, what do I know? Who am I? We're going to get the people that are going to push back. And then it dawned on me, and it hit me so hard. I was like, but no one would ever say that to you if you said you were pregnant for the first time. No one would say to you, hang on a minute, you don't know how to have children. No, they'll congratulate you. But if you say, I'm about to, yeah. But let's say you're a couch potato and you decide I want to run a marathon. People are going to say, well, hang on a minute, you don't know anything about running a marathon, right? No one, it's that, or starting a business. When we started Quest, the amount of people was like, you guys have no clue about protein bars. But if I turned around and said, I'm having a baby, no one would say, but you have no idea about how to have a baby.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also find that I think people look to permission versus, I think people subtly ask for permission too much. Like if you give someone else the control of permission, you're kind of fucked, because you put the decision in somebody else's hands versus, and I agree with you. I think people are very judgmental about what you should or should not do. You can't argue with a baby because it's biology, right? But you can argue with me being a master pianist or you being a marathoner because you don't run and I don't know how to read sheet music. And it also just shows you, I think the other big thing that I really jump onto is kind of to the, does it serve you? I always ask myself when criticized, is this true? And is it helpful? Like sometimes when you get criticized, it can be very helpful where you're like, okay, I'm learning something that is good for me to know. Other times I think that your brain can go into overdrive and get all worked up about things that are probably not true. It's your interpretation of something or your impression of something or your insecurity about something. So I think that the way you think about things are tools that everyone can use. But Lisa, I have to let you go, but tell us.
Oh man, I was just getting started, Erika. Come on, girl.
So tell us where people can find you, how you want them to follow you. And then we are 100% doing this again.
Oh, in a heartbeat, girl. One thing I do want to add that I think is extremely important though, with everything we're talking about, and then I'll say my socials, but this is very important. So guys, lean in and listen to this. No matter what you want, don't let anyone tell you you can't get it. So in the sense of, if you want to be a stay-at-home mother and take care of your children, you should believe in yourself and not listen to anyone else. And that's really where I struggle. I don't ever want someone to hear my story and think, oh, I'm saying don't be a stay-at-home wife. I think if that's what your dream is, do not let anyone else tell you otherwise. And for me, it just wasn't my dream. That wasn't what I asked for out of life. So whether it's having children, not having children, I worry that the conversation is going more into, start your own business, be a mother and a businesswoman.
You're like, I might not want to do that. Correct.
Exactly.
You're like, you do you, girl.
Yes. So when I say, like, the final thing I always say is be the hero of your own life. I'm not here to tell you what that looks like. Erika's not here to tell you what that looks like, right? But to believe that whatever that is that you want, it is freaking possible, and not to let other people judge you or influence you if you know that's right for you. So I just had to say that.
I love it.
Okay. And now, if you want to follow me, you can go over. I have my own podcast, Women of Impact. So we'd love to go over there. And then also Lisa Bilyeu on Instagram, where I share a lot of like personal stuff about me and just like my daily struggles every single day of how I show up every day. So.
All right, Lisa, you are awesome. I love you. I can't wait to talk to you again. I'm going to talk to like 25 women who I'm already late. So
oh god, okay, I'll let you go. Erika, when you're in LA, girl, I want to meet you in person.
Okay, great. I love that. You're awesome.
Hey, sweetie. You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So now that you're all as confident as fuck, as Lisa would say, it's time for a high noon. 100 calories, gluten-free, no added sugar. It tastes great. It's the perfect cocktail to end a summer day. They have a new limited edition tropical 8-pack. That includes mango, passion fruit, watermelon, pineapple. You can get my favorite peach, grapefruit, lime, watermelon, black cherry, you name it. You can get 4-packs or you can get 8-packs. They are delicious. Go enjoy yourself a high noon. Speaking of high noon, our adulting segment today is how do you ask for a vacation at work? So asking for a vacation at work. I don't know why people are so nervous about asking for a vacation at work. I guess I used to be nervous about asking for a vacation at work. I think sometimes there's this unwritten thing where you feel like you're slacking off by asking for a vacation, or somehow your boss is going to think you're disloyal by wanting to do something other than work. I get that. All I ever wanted to do was work. So I'm probably a nightmare in the vacation department. I would say assuredly a nightmare in the vacation department. But here's how I would ask for a vacation. One, everybody deserves vacation. Your company could have all different types of vacation policies. We have an open vacation policy, which HR Stephanie tells me is a problem because that means it's a no vacation policy. I don't want to be managing people's vacations. We used to have this vacation time tracker where I had ZA managing it. So people would request time off, and then ZA would send me an email and be like, so-and-so in the tech department wants 2 days off. Will you approve this? And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, I don't want to be in that business. But vacation is important. Why is vacation important? You have to recharge. I find that I'm going on vacation next week. Barstool's closed next week. I find that I'm like twitching and like my eye is like flickering on and off the days leading into vacation, which for me is an indication I need some time off. So everybody needs time off. How do you ask for it? One, be clear. Say, I need some time off, or I'm planning a family trip, or me and my boyfriend are going to do this thing, or I want to go home, or I have a girls' trip planned, whatever it may be, just be straight up. Two, be proactive. So plan your vacation well in advance. If you want to make it easy on your boss, put your vacation dates in their calendar. Ask for your vacation not 1 week before you go or 2 weeks before you go. Ask for vacation 2 months before you go. Have a meeting with your boss before you go on vacation to let them know the status of all of your projects and where they stand, and to let them know what your availability is going to be. Some people vacation and they're still accessible. I think sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So either say, hey, I'm not available at all this vacation, or I'm available usually for like an hour in the morning and an hour at the end of the day. So be clear about when you're available on vacation. If you're not clear about when you're available on vacation, people are going to take advantage of your vacation. And then when you're back from vacation, have a check-in again with your boss on like, hey, what did I miss? What happened? And then you can pick back up and you're off to the races. All right, that's it for today's episode. If you haven't already, give us a subscribe, leave us a rating or a review. You can call us at 440-462-1729. If you haven't already, join our Facebook group. It's awesome. We want to do more with the Facebook group. You can talk about jobs. You can talk about internships. There's great mentoring programs. You can also watch this episode on our YouTube channel. Just search for Token CEO. And then finally, you can follow us at Token CEO on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And you can find me at EKA Nardini. Before I let you go, I need to tell you that there are no episodes for this podcast on the 6th or the 8th because we are taking vacation. So you will miss us until we're back on Tuesday, July 13th. I think this is a great opportunity to listen to all sorts of episodes that you may have missed. So go and listen to our back catalog, check out our YouTube, or better yet, enjoy your 4th of July and go have some fun at the beach.